So I want you to picture this. It is 3 a.m. on November 15th, 1986.
Middle of the night.
Right, middle of the night. You're in the quiet community of Willow Creek, California. You are sound asleep, and then suddenly you just jolt awake.
Oh, the worst feeling.
It really is. Like your feet hit the floor before your brain even registers the emergency. And then the reality of the situation floods your senses. It's that suffocating chemical smell of thick smoke.
Which is terrifying.
Terrifying. And for 40-year-old Hansen, this was the start to his morning. He and his wife, Betty, they throw open their bedroom door, and they are just met by a wall of intense, roaring heat.
Wow.
Yeah, their double-wide trailer is entirely engulfed in flames, and through the deafening crackle of the fire, Hans hears this distinct, rhythmic popping noise echoing down the hall.
I mean, that is just a visceral, primal nightmare. You are plunged instantly into a fight for survival, operating entirely on adrenaline. And in this deep dive today, we are examining a story that begins as this harrowing rescue attempt, but then it completely shifts into a chilling, deeply complex, double homicide investigation.
Yeah, it really takes a turn.
It does. And we are pulling from a big stack of sources today. We've got true crime retrospective reporting, historical archives from the local paper, the Times Standard, and some direct accounts from the Hansen family, just to try and understand exactly what went wrong here.
Right, because our mission today is to look past those initial flames. We really want to unpack the actual mechanics of this investigation.
Yeah, because it falls apart so fast.
Exactly. Like, how does a case against a prime suspect who happens to be a family member look so structurally sound on a Tuesday and then entirely collapse by Friday due to just stunning investigative gaps?
It's wild to look at the source material, honestly.
It really is. The trajectory of this night is jarring for you as a listener because you expect the tragedy to be the fire itself. But the actual horror is hidden in the smoke.
Yeah, and to understand how this shifts from an emergency response to a crime scene, we kind of have to look at the physical geography of the home.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So the Hansens lived in a double-wide trailer, where the layout became a literal trap. The bedrooms and the bathrooms were clustered on one side, and they were connected by the single hallway to the living areas.
So only one way in and out.
Right. When Hans opens his door, that hallway is already an impassable barrier of fire. He can't get through. And his first thought goes to his 21-year-old stepson, Donnie.
Because Donnie usually sleeps on the living room couch, right?
Exactly. But when Hans makes it outside to check on him, the sliding glass door is wide open and Donnie is missing from his spot. So Hans just assumes, hey, Donnie made it out safely.
Right. Which leaves his 16-year-old twin daughters, Jill and Julie. And the fire is entirely blocking access to their bedroom door from the inside.
That's a parent's worst nightmare.
It really is. And looking at Hans's actions, the sheer panic is just palpable. I mean, he's grabbing fire extinguishers, he's sprinting to his nearby logging warehouse on the property for more, but the thermal energy of the fire is just too massive.
There's only so much you can do.
Yeah. So he ends up grabbing a garden hose, he smashes the exterior window of the girl's bedroom, and he throws the hose inside. And that is when he hears a cry for help coming from the dark, burning room.
God, that's haunting. And by the time the volunteer firefighters arrive, the scene is pure chaos.
Yeah.
But then Hans suddenly spots his daughter Julie outside.
Oh, thank goodness.
Right. In the dark, he hadn't even seen her escape. But first responders find her on the ground, and she is clutching her stomach in just absolute agony.
But because it's a raging fire, they assume it's a burn, right?
Well, given the context, the paramedics naturally operate on a very specific medical assumption. They believe the extreme heat caused something in the house to explode, and that debris severely injured her abdomen.
Which makes sense. I mean, that dictates the whole next sequence of events. They rush Julie to the hospital, and Hans and Betty ride with her.
Leaving Donnie behind.
Yeah, they leave Donnie behind at the property to wait for any news on Jill, who is still missing in the wreckage. But looking at the police reports from the hospital, there's this distinct shift in how law enforcement treats the family from this exact moment forward.
Because of what the doctor finds.
Right. The doctor comes out to update Hans and Betty, and he drops this absolute bombshell. He reveals that Julie's stomach injury was not caused by flying debris from a fire explosion. She was shot at close range.
I mean, instantly, the police stopped treating this as a rescue. It is now an active crime scene.
Yeah, the whole energy changes.
And the grim news coming from the property just confirms it. Later that morning, first responders discovered Jill's body in the kitchen. She didn't survive the blaze.
Oh, that's awful.
But the autopsy reveals a darker truth. She had also been shot. And then Investigators locate 2 empty gas cans at the scene, and they are the exact kind of gas cans Hans kept in his logging warehouse.
So it's arson.
Premeditated arson designed to cover up a double homicide.
Which completely recontextualizes Hans's testimony later. Remember, he said he heard those popping noises when he woke up?
Right.
He actually testified that he thought they were hairspray cans exploding in the heat. But wait, I have to ask. How does a father hear gunshots in his own hallway and just rationalize that as aerosol cans?
I know, it sounds improbable when we sit here analyzing it decades later.
Yeah, it really does.
But it actually perfectly aligns with the psychology of trauma and auditory masking.
Auditory masking?
Yeah, when you're thrust into a sudden high-stress emergency, the human brain desperately tries to categorize confusing sensory inputs so they fit the immediate visual threat.
Oh, so because he sees fire, he expects fire noises.
Exactly. Hans sees a raging, destructive fire. Therefore, his brain categorizes a sharp popping sound as a byproduct of that fire. It is basically a cognitive shortcut designed to help you survive what you can see rather than processing threats you can't see.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, he wasn't primed to expect a shootout in his hallway, so his brain literally edited the sound to make sense of the fire.
That reframing is fascinating. Like, he wasn't lying or misremembering. His brain was actively writing a narrative to protect him in that exact moment.
Absolutely.
But the reality of the violence is just unspeakably cruel when you actually look at the victims. Jill and Julie were highly visible, beloved teenagers in this town.
They were.
And Jill, she had actually just beaten this grueling 6-year battle with leukemia. She was diagnosed at age 10, the whole community had rallied behind her, and she had just received a clean bill of health.
It's just devastating.
To survive cancer only to be murdered in your own home, I mean, you can completely understand why the initial police reaction was to look outward for some kind of monster.
And historically speaking, Humboldt County in 1986 offered plenty of monsters.
Oh, for sure.
While Willow Creek itself was this quieter community, the surrounding region was notoriously nicknamed Murder Mountain.
Murder Mountain, that says it all.
It really does. It was an area infamous for off-the-grid violence, disappearances, and massive, highly lucrative illegal drug operations.
Right, and looking at the early dispatch notes, there was certainly evidence pointing in that direction. Neighbors actually reported seeing some highly suspicious activity right as the fire started.
What kind of activity?
Well, one neighbor saw 2 teenage boys standing near the trailer watching the blaze, and specifically noted that one of them had fresh ashes on his shoulder.
That is incredibly suspicious.
Right, and other neighbors heard the blasts and saw a car peeling out, speeding toward Highway 199. So, with cartel activity basically in their backyard, a drug-related home invasion feels like the most logical starting point for an investigator.
It is a really compelling starting point. But this highlights how real-world criminology diverges from, theoretical profiling.
How so?
Well, when investigators assess a crime scene, the physical behavior of the perpetrator really dictates the pivot.
Okay.
And this crime involved highly specific, intimate violence, navigating a dark, complex trailer layout to execute sleeping targets, and taking the time to locate the family's own gas cans to meticulously burn the house down.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, that behavioral profile suggests an insider. Professional hitmen, or thrill seekers, they don't typically hunt for a homeowner's personal garden equipment to cover a crime. They bring their own weapons, execute the job, and leave immediately.
Right, they aren't looking around for your shed. Which explains why the police start looking closer to home. Because fire inherently destroys so much biological evidence, investigators are basically forced to rely heavily on behavioral anomalies and whatever surviving physical forensics they can find.
And they find something big.
They find a massive piece of the puzzle. It was hidden behind some boxes in Hans's logging warehouse. A 12-gauge shotgun.
Wow.
And on that shotgun is a very clear palm print.
And this is where things get tense. Because Hans explicitly tells the police that he does not own a 12-gauge shotgun. He only owned an old childhood rifle.
But the cops find something else, don't they?
Yeah, a quick search of Donnie's car reveals unspent 12-gauge shotgun shells sitting right there in the back seat.
Oh, man. So when detectives bring this to the 21-year-old stepson, Donnie just outright admits he borrowed that exact shotgun from a friend earlier that week for target practice.
And the friend later corroborates that, by the way.
Right. And Donnie's explanation is that he simply forgot to return it and he just left it in his car. But then the behavioral anomalies start stacking up.
Like what?
Well, the police have the property staked out, watching to see if anyone returns to the scene of the crime. And who shows up lurking around the warehouse? Donnie.
Yeah, and when a detective steps out and confronts him, Donnie claims he was just looking for the family dog.
Which sounds fine, until you talk to Hans.
Exactly. Hans later clarifies to the police that Donnie knew the dog was staying safely with a friend. He had absolutely no reason to search for the dog.
So, law enforcement immediately suspects Donnie was returning to retrieve the hidden murder weapon before they could find it.
Which makes perfect sense from their perspective. And the circumstantial timeline just gets tighter from there. Investigators discovered that days before the fire, Donnie actually used the family credit card to buy 5 gallons of gas.
But he didn't put it in his car.
Nope. He filled a portable gas can, claiming his car's fuel spout was bent.
Huh.
Furthermore, the sources indicate Donnie and his mother, Betty, had a major falling out the Thursday prior. They bickered over Donnie refusing to take an item out of the freezer.
Over frozen food.
Yeah, he stormed out of the house, threatened to move away, but then returned the day before the murders.
Which naturally leads to the question of motive. And I really have to push back on this.
I figure you would.
I mean, a teenager bickers with his mom about frozen food, and we're supposed to draw a straight line to annihilating his sisters. That is an incredibly weak primary motive. If every argument over household chores led to arson, there wouldn't be a single house left standing in the country.
No, you're right. If we apply that logic to a courtroom, you are absolutely correct. A freezer argument cannot sustain a murder charge.
Exactly.
But detectives don't usually arrest based on the strength of a motive alone. They build cases on the compounding mechanics of opportunity, access, and witness testimony.
True.
And the most damning piece of that puzzle comes from the surviving victim, Julie.
Yeah, because a few days after the fire, Julie miraculously wakes up in the hospital.
It's incredible.
At first, she's communicating through writing, but as she regains her strength, she starts talking, and her account of that night is just terrifying. She tells police that just before 3 a.m., she woke up to a distinct sound. She described it as someone loading heavy batteries into a flashlight.
Which, to a firearms expert, sounds exactly like the mechanical clack of a pump-action shotgun being racked.
Right, so she walks down the hall toward the living room to investigate, and she is ambushed. She states that when the shotgun fired, in the split-second flash of the muzzle, she saw Donnie's face in the dark.
That is a crucial statement, but it's important to note the nuance here. Julie never explicitly stated Donnie was the individual holding the weapon.
Oh, that's a good point.
And Donnie's own account to the police was that he was asleep on the couch, woke up to a blast, saw Julie collapse, and ran over to help her.
So technically...
Right, seeing his face illuminated by the muzzle flash could technically just corroborate his presence in the room.
Wow.
But for law enforcement, when you combine her visual identification with the recent gas purchase, the hidden gun, and the ammunition in his car, it provides enough structural integrity to really tighten the net around him.
And this tension leads to a confrontation that just permanently fractures the family. The police had explicitly instructed Hans not to mention the hidden shotgun to Donnie.
But Hans is a grieving father.
He is. He's living out of a motorhome in the hospital parking lot, and the pressure is unbearable. When Donnie stops by the motorhome, Hans abandons the police instructions. He looks Donnie right in the eye and asks him, point blank, about the 12-gauge shotgun.
And Donnie's psychological response is explosive. He becomes highly agitated, screams that he is innocent, and physically flees the area.
Just takes off.
Yeah, and for Hans, observing that reaction was a definitive answer. From that moment on, he fully believed his stepson was responsible and severed ties with him completely.
It's so tragic. Following that confrontation, Donnie actually voluntarily goes to the police station, likely trying to clear his name, but he ends up taking 2 polygraph tests and fails them both. Then he drastically changes his story.
It never looks good.
Never. Remember his initial claim that the gun was just sitting in his back seat? He now admits to police that he did hide the gun in the warehouse. But his justification defies all logic. He claims that in the middle of a roaring fire, with his sisters trapped and burning, he suddenly remembered the shotgun was in his car.
What?
Right. He said he worried the police would find it and frame him, so he paused his rescue efforts to go hide the weapon.
Which is an extraordinarily difficult narrative for any investigator to accept. And the forensic science delivers what appears to be an irrefutable timeline.
Because of the palm print?
Yes. The palm print on the shotgun is confirmed to be Donnie's, but it is the chemical context of that print that really matters here. The print is encased in fire extinguisher residue.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of that, because that implies he didn't just touch it on a Tuesday during target practice.
No.
He touched it during the fire. How does the residue actually prove that?
It comes down to the physical properties of the chemicals. When a standard fire extinguisher discharges, it releases a very fine, highly abrasive chemical powder, usually as monoammonium phosphate. If you leave fresh oils and sweat from a palm print on the cold steel of a shotgun, and that chemical powder settles over it, it essentially acts as a casting agent.
Wow, it seals it.
Exactly. It binds to the oils and seals the print. It locks that physical interaction into a highly specific timestamp. He had to have handled that gun while the extinguisher dust was actively in the air.
That is incredible forensic context. It physically links him to the weapon at the exact moment of the arson.
It's the smoking gun.
Literally.
Yeah.
So consequently, Donnie is arrested and charged. But before the trial even gets underway, a bizarre and heartbreaking medical tragedy fundamentally alters the legal stakes.
Yeah, this part is so hard.
2 weeks after the arrest, Julie, who had been recovering, talking, assisting the police, she suddenly dies in the hospital.
It is a devastating blow for the family. And the cause of death wasn't directly the trauma of the gunshot wound.
No.
It was a freak medical accident. An air bubble somehow entered her bloodstream through an IV feeding tube, causing a fatal embolism.
It's just unbelievable.
Instantly, Donnie is facing 2 counts of murder, and the district attorney decides to seek the death penalty.
And if we revisit my earlier pushback about the flimsy frozen food motive, the prosecution actually brings forward a much darker, calculated theory for the trial.
Which makes a lot more sense for a jury.
Right. Hans had built this booming, highly lucrative logging supply business. The sources note he openly discussed the $250,000 life insurance policies he held on the children.
That's a lot of money in 1986.
Massive. And they carried a double indemnity clause, meaning they paid out $500,000 in the event of an accidental death.
So the prosecution's theory was that Donnie, who had dropped out of college and was kind of drifting, wanted quick cash to buy an expensive Corvette.
The Corvette, right.
They argued he hatched a plan to stage a fatal fire to inherit that insurance money.
When you look at the architecture of the Spates case, the palm print locked in chemical residue, the insurance payout, the altered stories, it really looks impenetrable.
It does.
The public certainly assumed it was a guaranteed conviction. But when the trial commenced in April of 1988, that structurally sound case completely collapsed.
Yeah, and it wasn't necessarily because the defense proved Donnie's innocence. It was because they exposed that the police investigation was built on an incredibly fragile, incompetent foundation.
This is where we need to look at the legal mechanics, because the defense team essentially puts the local police department on trial.
They really do.
They start pulling at threads, and the whole tapestry unravels. For instance, the police found Donnie's palm print on the gun, which is great. But the defense points out they never bothered to test the gun or the box of shells for any other fingerprints.
Which is a catastrophic failure of forensic best practices. I mean, finding your prime suspect's print is only step 1.
Right.
You must then clear the weapon of other potential contributors to rule out accomplices or alternate suspects. By failing to do so, the police just left a massive analytical void.
And it wasn't just the gun.
No. The defense also highlighted that the lock on the trailer's sliding glass door, the very door near where Donnie was sleeping, had physical tool marks indicating it had been tampered with.
Which strongly suggests an external break-in.
Exactly.
But the absolute bombshell of the trial, the detail that exposes the intersection of early-era investigative hubris and small-town nepotism, involves those 2 teenage boys seen watching the fire.
Oh, this is the craziest part.
The neighbors reported them, noting one had ashes on him. It turns out the police did conduct an interview with those boys, but the deputy assigned to question them was one of the boys' own uncles.
It is a staggering conflict of interest that compromises the integrity of the entire investigation.
And the execution of it is even worse. The deputy completely omitted his familial relationship from the official paperwork, and he buried the entire content of that conversation.
Just left it out completely.
It never made it into the main reports. And by the way, retrospective reporting later tracked one of those boys down. The individual admitted he was high on acid that night and barely remembers his own actions.
But because the uncle buried the lead, the police never followed up.
Exactly. By burying that interview and failing to test for other prints, the police essentially built a structurally unsound house.
Right. The defense didn't have to prove Donnie was a saint. They just had to show the jury the missing foundational bricks.
And that allowed them to introduce an alternate narrative.
Yeah, the defense hypothesized that intruders, perhaps those very teens, were casing the property. They found the shotgun in Donnie's unlocked car, picked the lock on the sliding glass door, and sneaked inside to commit arson.
Okay.
When Julie interrupted them, they panicked and fired. The blast woke Donnie, causing the intruders to flee, shooting Jill on their way out.
God.
And finally, as they escaped, they tossed the shotgun back into Donnie's car.
Okay, pause. I have to apply some basic human logic here.
I knew where you were going with this.
If you are an intruder, you have just broken into a home, ignited a massive fire, and shot 2 teenagers. You are operating in a state of absolute blind panic. Why on earth would you pause your frantic escape to meticulously place the murder weapon back into the victim's car in the driveway? You would throw it into the woods as you ran. That narrative makes zero logical sense.
Your skepticism is entirely justified. It defies criminal logic. But this highlights the fundamental mechanics of the justice system.
Right.
The defense does not bear the burden of proving their alternate theory is the objective truth. They only have to prove that the state's narrative contains reasonable doubt.
Reasonable doubt.
And the defense found a massive timeline flaw regarding the victims to support that doubt. Remember Hans testifying that he was outside with the garden hose and he heard a cry for help from inside the burning bedroom?
Yes, right after he smashed the window.
Well, multiple witness testimonies established that by the time Hans was outside operating that hose, Donnie was already outside standing in the driveway with him.
Wait, really?
Yeah, so if the person crying for help was Jill, meaning she was still alive while Donnie was visibly outside,
then Donnie physically could not have been the individual who shot her in the kitchen moments later.
Exactly.
That is a brilliant legal maneuver. So you combine a tampered lock, a covered-up interview by a deputy uncle, a failure to exclude other fingerprints, and an impossible timeline.
Yep.
And suddenly, that impenetrable case is nothing but reasonable doubt.
Exactly. The burden of proof rests entirely on the prosecution. The investigative shortcuts handed the defense an acquittal on a silver platter.
So what happens?
The jury deliberated for a mere 6 hours.
Wow.
The verdict was not guilty.
That is just wow. And the immediate aftermath of this verdict is visually surreal. After the trial concludes, the jurors actually go out for dinner and drinks with Donnie and his defense attorney.
It is a highly unusual, almost provocative visual for a jury to socialize with the defendant immediately following a double murder trial.
I mean, imagine grabbing a beer with a man who is just on trial for executing his family.
It's hard to picture.
But the jurors were quite vocal with the press. They stated they did it as a protest against the flat-out incompetence of the police investigation.
They wanted to make a point.
Yeah, they felt the sheriff's department profoundly failed the Hansen family, and their verdict was an indictment of the system, not necessarily an endorsement of Donnie's innocence.
Which really forces us to synthesize the ultimate tragedy of this case.
Yeah.
It is a masterclass in the collateral damage of a botched investigation.
Absolutely.
Because law enforcement developed tunnel vision and failed to rigorously document their forensic work, the legal mechanics of justice failed. A family lost 2 daughters to horrific violence. They lost a son to permanent unresolved estrangement.
Yeah.
And the community of Willow Creek was left infected with lifelong paranoia.
Because there is absolutely no closure. Following the acquittal, Donnie legally changed his last name, moved to the Midwest, and started a new family.
Total fresh start.
Yeah, he completely disconnected from his past, never speaking to Hans or Betty again. According to recent updates, Donnie actually died in a car crash in Indiana in May of 2025.
And Hans's reaction to that news was chillingly stoic. He told reporters that Donnie's death didn't feel like a blow because his stepson had been dead to him since that night outside the hospital motorhome in 1986.
That is heavy.
Hans remains resolute in his conviction that Donnie pulled the trigger. Betty has struggled more deeply with the reality, wrestling with the agonizing sociology of whether her own son could be capable of such violence.
I can't even imagine that internal battle.
But they never stopped seeking the truth. They actually took the girl's $50,000 college fund and converted it into a reward for information, a reward that remains active today.
So what does this all mean for us as we wrap up this deep dive? We started by examining a horrific fire, but we uncovered a complex story about the fragility of the justice system.
We really did.
When the people tasked with finding the truth cut corners, the truth simply evaporates. But looking through our sources, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over.
Oh, what specific detail caught your attention?
It's the VCR. Investigators noted in their reports that a brand new, highly valuable VCR was sitting untouched on the television set, right next to the sliding glass door where the intruders supposedly entered.
Right, which is odd.
In 1986, a VCR was a massive luxury item. It was highly targeted by thieves.
Yeah, you would just leave it.
If this wasn't a robbery because nothing of value was actually taken, and if we entertain the idea that Donnie truly didn't do it, what if the girls weren't the targets at all?
Oh, that is a fascinating reframing of the initial motive.
Think about the context we discussed earlier.
Ugh.
Hans had a booming, lucrative logging supply business.
Yeah, he did.
What if the arson was an act of corporate sabotage? What if the intent was merely to destroy Hans's business assets and ruin him financially, and the intruders broke in just to set the fire?
But then the teenagers woke up.
Exactly. The intruders panicked, shot the witnesses to silence them, and fled without stealing anything. It fundamentally alters the narrative of that entire night.
It really forces you to question the very foundation of every assumption made by the police from minute one.
Exactly. I want you to ponder that alternate theory. Because sometimes, when the smoke finally clears, the landscape you are left looking at is murkier than ever. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning what you see.